Have you ever felt that only when a deadline is breathing down your neck do you truly switch into full productivity mode? Only when pressure is weighing on your shoulders do you feel alive. But then when the project ends, when the clock stops counting down, you fall into emptiness, exhaustion, and don't know what to do next. I've seen so many people live like that. They don't really have a plan, they just have reactions. No system, just chaos disguised as passion. Quote, they believe the more pressure they take on, the farther they'll go. But the truth is, pressure doesn't create productivity, it only reveals disorder. Successful people don't live under pressure. They live within structure. They have clear schedules, principles, and systems that allow them to create freely without being dragged down by chaos. Structure isn't a prison. Structure is the frame that helps you hold the shape of your life. Look at a professional athlete. He doesn't wait until a tournament comes around to start training. He trains every day at the same time in the same way, so that when pressure comes, his body and mind are already prepared. Pressure isn't a burden, it's just fuel, burned within an existing framework. And that's why successful people don't need pressure to act. They act because they've trained themselves to live by a system. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 7 life patterns that help you stay free yet effective, patterns that allow you to stop chasing pressure because discipline itself becomes the freedom you've been seeking. And stay until the end of the video because Principle #7 will completely change the way you see freedom. So you'll understand that true freedom isn't doing whatever you want, but knowing you're doing something worth living for. Quote, Principle, 1, structure frees your energy. I once visited a young friend, a startup founder, full of energy but constantly tense. I asked, what's making you so tired? He said, I have too many things to do, too many problems to handle. I looked around his workspace, papers piled high, dozens of tabs open on his screen, and a countdown clock for a deadline right in front of him. I smiled and said, you're not tired because you're doing too much. You're tired because you lack order. Pressure isn't a sign of productivity, it's a sign of a lack of system. You can work tirelessly all day, but without a clear framework, you're just running in circles inside chaos. You think you're moving forward, but really you're just putting out fires that you started yourself. I learned something early in life. If you don't design a plan for your life, you'll fall into someone else's plan. And guess what? They don't have any plans for you. Even the smallest structure is a map that frees your energy. It lets you stop making repetitive decisions every day so you can save energy for what truly matters. You don't need to wake up asking, where should I start today? The framework will lead you. It's your most loyal companion. Look at a professional athlete. He doesn't wait until a competition to start training. He trains every day at the same time with the same process so that when pressure comes, he doesn't panic. He simply performs. That's the difference between ordinary people and outstanding ones. Ordinary people work under pressure. Successful people work within structure. You see, structure isn't restrictive. It doesn't chain you, it frees you. When everything has its place, your mind is free to create. When your day has structure, you don't have to fight for motivation anymore. Motivation comes from the stability that structure gives you. I once told my student, you don't need more energy, you just need to stop leaking the energy you already have. And what causes energy leakage is chaos, spontaneous disorder. So if you feel exhausted, don't ask, how can I get more energy? Ask, where is my energy leaking? And you'll realize that most of it escapes where structure is missing. When you live with structure, you don't need pressure to push you forward. You already have a system that keeps you moving steadily every day. And the magic is, when everything in your life falls into order, that's when your mind becomes the freest. But structure doesn't just help you work more effectively. It also helps you rest without feeling guilty. And that's the secret behind Principle #2 I want to share with you. Principle 2, a system that lets you rest without guilt. I used to be someone who didn't know how to rest. I worked late every night, thinking that if I stopped, everything would collapse. I was afraid of slowing down, afraid of falling behind others. Then one evening, I sat in my office too tired to think anymore. I looked around and realized I wasn't working for effectiveness. I was working out of fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of others moving faster than me. It took me years to learn one simple but powerful truth. If you don't have a system, you'll never dare to rest because you don't know what will fall apart when you stop. A person without structure works like a firefighter in a burning building. They run everywhere, putting out one flame after another, and when they sit down for a moment, another puff of smoke rises. They can't rest not because they're too busy, but because they don't have a system reliable enough to keep things running without them. I remember one of my students once asked me, "Teacher, how can I work efficiently and still feel at peace?" I told him, "Build your system first, then let the system work for you." When you have a system, you're not afraid to rest, because you know that even when you stop, your life keeps running along the path you designed. Look at truly successful people, CEOs, athletes, creative artists. They don't work 18 hours a day. They rest properly. They know when to stop and when to recharge, because they understand that rest isn't laziness. It's part of the success system. People with systems don't feel guilty when resting because they know every minute of rest helps them perform better when they return. I once met a young entrepreneur, extremely passionate, extremely driven, but he worked without a schedule. Every time he took a break, his mind filled with anxiety. Is someone surpassing me right now? One day he came to me exhausted and confused. I simply said, if you need to rest but feel guilty, it means you don't have a system. When your system is strong enough, you'll rest with gratitude, not with fear. You see, systems create quiet confidence. They let you do less but achieve more. They help you know when you've done enough and when to stop to recover. Just like in sports, muscles don't grow during training, they grow during proper rest after training. So if you feel like you can't stop, if you fear that stopping work means stopping progress, remember this, that fear isn't real, it's just a sign you lack a system. Successful people don't seek temporary balance. They build structures that automatically bring them back to balance. They work during set hours, rest in stillness, and return with twice the energy because they know they're on the right path. If you want to work without burning out, start by setting up a living system, fixed working hours. Time for learning, family, and exercise. A quiet moment each day for reflection. When you respect your schedule, you'll gain peace of mind, a feeling no amount of pressure can bring. Remember this, a person with a system never fears rest, because they know it's the stability of structure that allows them to regenerate energy so they can return stronger, clearer, and more peaceful than before. But there's something even deeper, because sometimes it's our misunderstanding of freedom that makes us reject structure and lose our energy. Let's move on to principle #3, where you'll understand that freedom doesn't come from breaking the rules, but from understanding them. Principle 3. Freedom doesn't come from breaking the rules, but from understanding them. I've met many young people who tell me, "Teacher, I don't like constraints. I want freedom." And I smile, because I used to be like them. I used to think freedom meant doing whatever I wanted, with no one controlling me. No schedule, no structure. But you know what? When I lived like that, I felt tired, directionless, and full of pressure. Freedom isn't doing anything you want. It's knowing you're doing what's right. Think about music. A musician can't create a beautiful melody with emotion alone. He needs to understand rhythm, harmony, modulation. Only when he masters the rules can he create beyond the framework. True freedom doesn't come from breaking things. It comes from mastering the rules. I remember when I was young, I worked for a very strict boss. He made me arrive on time, submit reports on deadline, and never allowed me to be impulsive. Back then, I was extremely uncomfortable. I thought he was holding me back, stifling my creativity. But years later, when I began running my own work, I realized those very rules saved me from chaos. Because when you have structure, you don't have to force yourself to be creative, since creativity arises within the stability of discipline. I once said in a talk, freedom and discipline are two sides of the same coin. If you choose to abandon discipline, you're abandoning your freedom as well. It sounds paradoxical, but it's the truth. When you break the rules, you think you're being free, but in fact, you're just losing control of yourself. You become a slave to emotions, bad habits, and procrastination. Look at a top athlete. He gets up on time, eats according to plan, trains at the right intensity. Some people look and say, "Why live so rigidly?" But he doesn't feel miserable because behind the framework is the power of freedom, the freedom to win, the freedom to choose his own path. A person with structure doesn't need to fight themselves every day. They don't wake up and wrestle with, should I work today? Because the system decides for them. When the framework becomes instinct, you don't have to force yourself, you just live. I once had a student, very creative, very smart, but always feeling stuck. He told me, teacher, I can't work on a schedule. I like freedom. Akinu, I said, your freedom isn't wrong, but you're using it in the wrong place. You're using freedom to avoid discipline instead of using it to master discipline. Once you understand the rules, you'll know how to bend them without breaking them. You see, understanding the rules doesn't take away your freedom. It gives you the foundation to create without fearing you'll lose yourself, like a swimmer. Precisely because they understand the laws of water, they can move freely in it. But someone who doesn't understand the rules will sink the moment they step into the pool. True freedom isn't the absence of limits. It's the deliberate setting of limits that help you grow. No one is restraining you. Structure itself is what protects you from chaos. I want you to pause and ask yourself, am I living free or just avoiding discipline? Am I mastering my life or just running from responsibility? If you're honest with yourself, you'll realize freedom isn't out there. Freedom lies in how you master your own framework. And once you understand that true freedom begins with discipline, the next step is learning how to maintain that structure every day. Not by force, but by clear goals. Let's move on to principle number 4, where you'll understand why repetition isn't boring if you know where you're headed. Principle C, repetition isn't boring if you know your goal. I once heard a young person complain, teacher, I'm so bored. Every day it's the same work, the same habits, the same schedule. I feel like I'm not making any progress. I looked at him and said, it's not repetition that's exhausting you, it's that you don't know what you're repeating for. Repetition isn't boring if you clearly understand its meaning. Successful people don't see repetition as torture, they see it as the ladder to the summit. A farmer doesn't get bored watering his crops every day because he knows he's nurturing the harvest. An athlete doesn't tire of practicing the same movement because he knows it's the only way to win. For someone without a goal, each repetition erodes their belief. I remember a time when I gave hundreds of talks in a single year. Same topic, same message, repeated over and over. Many people asked me, don't you get bored? I just smiled. How could I be bored when each talk is a chance to touch a different soul? I don't repeat to hear myself. I repeat to sow seeds, and I know those seeds will sprout somewhere at the moment they're needed. You see, repetition only becomes a burden when you lose sight of the big picture. When you no longer remember why you started, every action feels tiring. But when you know where you're headed, each repetition is a step forward, not boredom accumulation. I want you to remember this. Discipline is the bridge between dreams and reality. And that bridge isn't built in a day. It's built from thousands of bricks. Small, monotonous, but correct actions, repeated until the form takes shape. Those who don't understand the value of repetition usually quit right before the results appear. They change goals, change methods, and think, I need something newer. But novelty doesn't lie in changing paths. It lies in digging deeper into the path you're on. I once told a student of mine, if repetition feels unbearably boring, it's probably because you haven't put enough meaning into it. Turn each repetition into a refinement. Great people don't stop repeating. They just repeat with increasing precision. Look at pianists who practice the same piece for hours. But it's not to press the right keys. It's to feel each note. The focus don't seek differences on the outside. They find subtlety on the inside. And you're the same. If you spend 30 minutes reading every day, remember, you're not just reading 10 more pages, you're rereading yourself to understand more deeply, awaken more fully, see more clearly. Repetition without a goal is a vicious circle. Repetition with a goal is the road to the peak. I want you to pause and ask yourself, am I doing this because I fear missing out or because I truly believe in the path I'm on? Is each day a tiring loop or a honing of my dream? If you have clear answers, every repetition in your life will become a ritual of growth. And remember, structure only comes alive when you tie it to a goal. When you know why you're doing it, you don't need anyone to push you, the goal will lead you. And when repetition becomes a natural part of your life, the miracle begins. Because at that point, you're no longer practicing the framework has become your natural reflex. Let's move on to principle number 5, where you'll understand what it means to live without strain, because you and the framework are one. Principle. Turn the framework into a reflex. I used to tell my students, discipline isn't about straining yourself every day to do the right thing. True discipline is when you no longer have to try because it has become part of who you are. When the framework becomes a reflex, you don't have to force yourself to wake up early, you simply are an early riser. You don't have to force yourself to read, you simply are someone who always learns. You no longer fight yourself to maintain habits because the habits have become your identity. I remember a phase in my life when I struggled to keep my study and work schedule. Every morning, the alarm rang and a battle began. Should I get up now or 5 more minutes? Have you ever felt that? That feeling of negotiating with yourself just to do what you know is good for you. But after a few years, I noticed something strange. I no longer had to fight. I woke up without thinking, as if my body already knew its task. Why? Because the small habits I trained every day had shifted from willpower to instinct. When you live by the right framework long enough, you don't have to execute anymore. You become that framework. That's the highest level of freedom. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's no longer having to struggle to do what's right. I once coached a young friend, very diligent but easily discouraged. He said, I do well for a few weeks, then I drop off. I don't know why. I asked, are you waiting for inspiration to work? He replied, maybe, teacher. I smiled and said, that's the problem. If you wait for inspiration, you'll only work on sunny days. But success comes from repetition, even on the cloudiest days. Inspiration is the wind. Structure is the sail. Those with a sail don't fear shifting winds. They know how to adjust to keep moving forward. Once the framework is ingrained in you, it's like breathing. You no longer have to think about it. Like people who exercise regularly, and one day, they no longer see working out as a duty, but as an indispensable part of life. That is the power of positive reflex. But how do you turn the framework into a reflex? There's only one way. Remain consistent during the hardest phase. Not when everything is easy, but precisely when you want to quit. That's when the framework is formed. Each time you push through the urge to take a break, you're teaching your mind one thing. I'm someone who does the right thing, even when I don't feel like it. I call it training in silence. No applause, no recognition, but inside, you're building the nervous system of success. Each repeated action is like a small strand, and over time, they weave into the rope of identity, where you no longer need effort to maintain because you've become the person you wanted to be. I once said in a speech, don't just practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. That's the power of reflex. It's no longer a conscious action. It's the natural response of a disciplined person. When the framework becomes a reflex, you don't need motivation to start. You don't need to fear losing focus because focus has become your very breathing. And that's why successful people seem calm, because they don't have to strain themselves. They simply live within their own framework. One day, you realize the greatest freedom doesn't come from breaking the mold, but from merging completely with the right framework. Then everything you do becomes light. You're no longer chasing goals. Your life itself becomes the proof of those goals. But a framework isn't something fixed forever. Like a growing person, you must know when to change the framework to fit your new version of yourself. And that's what I want to share in principle number 6, where you'll learn how to evolve your framework without losing your identity. Principle Shabakista. Create a framework for your current season. I once had a very capable student named Daniel. He worked with extreme discipline, following his schedule every day. But after a few years, he came to see me, his face tired. He said, "Teacher, I'm still as disciplined as before, but I don't feel excited anymore. I still do the work, still follow the framework, but inside I feel empty." I stayed quiet for a moment and then asked, "Daniel, have you ever considered that the framework that helped you succeed yesterday might not be the framework that fits who you are today?" He looked up and fell silent. I knew that question touched on what many people are facing. You see, discipline doesn't mean being fixed. A framework isn't a prison, it's a living map. And like any map, at some point, it needs to be updated when your journey changes. What traps many people isn't a lack of discipline, but that they're living in an old framework for a person who has already changed. I once had a very strict framework in the early years of my career. I worked almost without rest, demanding more of myself every day, and that helped me succeed. But then at a certain stage, I realized my goal had changed from make as much money as possible to pass on value and experience. If I had kept the old framework, I would have become a prisoner of my previous success. Maturity isn't just achieving more, it's knowing when to change the structure to fit the person you're becoming. In your 20 seconds, your framework might be learning, working, breaking through, but by your 30 seconds and 40 seconds, that framework might need more balance, health, family, and quiet. That's not getting weaker. That's the natural evolution of awareness. I always tell my students, don't wish for things to be easier, wish to be stronger. And part of that strength is knowing when to change how you live. And if you're trying to keep everything the same just because it used to work, you're resisting your own natural growth. Instead of staying loyal to the past, stay loyal to your current mission. Look at nature. An eagle, when grown, must break its nest to fly farther. If it clings to the old nest, even if it's safe and warm, it will never learn to spread its wings. People are the same. At some point, you must break the frameworks that once supported you to create new ones suited to your new heights. One of the biggest mistakes disciplined people make is believing that if it was right once, it will always be right. But discipline isn't about repeating the old. It's about maintaining the exact spirit of discipline through every stage of the journey. I changed my work schedule when I first had children. Before, I worked late into the night. But with a family, I decided to end my workday earlier so I could have dinner with my wife and kids. Some people thought I was loosening my discipline. No, I simply changed the framework to fit my new priority. And that made me more balanced and more effective. Discipline isn't rigidity. Discipline is the ability to maintain order even when everything changes. Flexible people aren't weak. They're strong enough to adapt without losing their identity. Pause and ask yourself, does the framework I'm living today still serve my current goals? Am I keeping a schedule out of fear of change or because it truly helps me grow? If the answer is no, have the courage to rewrite your framework, because every new version of you deserves a new life structure. When you learn to evolve your framework, you'll never be stuck between the past and the future. You'll live in the natural flow of growth, where discipline doesn't confine you, but lifts you to new heights. And once you know how to evolve your framework for each season, you'll come to the deepest realization. A framework doesn't just help you work effectively, it teaches you to understand yourself. Let me take you to principle number 7, where you'll see why. The framework is the greatest teacher of your life. Principle, the framework is the greatest teacher. I've met thousands of people over my years of teaching. Some ask me, teacher, who taught you the most about success? And I always answer, the greatest teacher in my life isn't a person, but the very framework I choose to live by every day. Because a framework doesn't talk much, it teaches you by reflection. It doesn't scold you when you're wrong, but it gives you precise results for every action you take. You want to know whether you're on the right path? Don't look at your feelings, look at your daily framework. You can't expect a different future if every day you still live within the same old framework. A framework is the fairest teacher. It doesn't play favorites, has no emotions. It simply responds according to how you operate. If you sow discipline into it, it will return freedom to you. If you sow procrastination into it, it will return regret. There was a time when I lived in chaos. I worked without a plan, ate irregularly, and always felt I didn't have enough time. One day, I sat down, opened a notebook, and wrote out every small habit I had. I looked at that list and asked myself, if I keep living like this for another 5 years, who will I become? The answer left me speechless. I knew I didn't need to change my whole life at once. I just needed to change my framework. From then on, I started step by step, waking up 1 hour earlier each day, reading 10 pages instead of 0 pages, scheduling work, rest, and learning clearly. None of these were huge, but repeated long enough, they restructured my entire self. A framework is a silent teacher, but the most patient one. It will wait for you day after day until you're willing to learn your own lesson. Think about this. A good teacher can show you the way, but only your framework truly takes you to the destination. Every book, every course, every piece of advice becomes meaningless if you don't turn it into patterned action. When you repeat the right things daily, you don't just change results. You're reforging your mind, your beliefs, and your identity. I once told a student, your framework is the most honest mirror. It doesn't reflect what you want. It reflects exactly what you do. If you want to see your best self, look at your framework today. It will show you who you'll be tomorrow. And then you'll realize something profound. A framework doesn't just help you succeed, it teaches you to grow up. It teaches you patience, teaches you humility, and teaches you that every great change begins in silence. Don't be proud of how well you handle pressure. Be proud that you have a framework that makes pressure unnecessary. Because success isn't working yourself to exhaustion, but living in an order that gives you peace while you rise. I want you to remember this. One day, you realize you don't need to look for a new teacher because the greatest teacher is already in the habits you keep every day. And once you understand that your framework is the teacher, the journey doesn't end there. Because the most important thing is whether you're brave enough to start building your own framework starting today. Let's move to the final part, where we close this journey with a message I believe you'll remember for a long time. Some people live their whole lives under pressure and think that's the price of success. But then they realize pressure doesn't make you bigger. It only makes you more tired. Others, they choose to live within a framework. They work with principles, rest with order, and they grow with peace because they understand success doesn't come from noise, but from quiet momentum built each day. Today, I want you to remember these 7 principles. 1 Zen framework frees your energy. When everything has its place, your mind is free to create. 2 ADA system lets you rest without guilt, because those with a plan never fear stopping. 3-2 freedom doesn't come from breaking rules, but from understanding them. Self-control is the root of freedom. 4-1 repetition isn't boring if you know your goal. Identical days aren't meaningless if you know where you're headed. 5 turn. Turn the framework into a reflex. When discipline becomes instinct, you no longer have to try. You just live. 6 starter create a framework for your current season because life changes, and your framework should mature with it. 7W. The framework is the greatest teacher. It teaches patience, forges you in silence, and honestly reflects who you're becoming. So don't be proud of how well you handle pressure. Be proud that you have a framework that makes pressure unnecessary. True success isn't about running faster than others, but about staying steady longer than everyone else. And only a framework can give you that. If today you truly want to live a free life, free from chaos, exhaustion, and regret, then start by designing your own framework. It doesn't need to be perfect, only consistent, because the greatest change begins with the smallest actions, done every day. If today's sharing resonated with you, leave a comment. I choose the framework. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can learn to live free within order instead of living under pressure and mistaking it for success. See you in the next video, where we continue the journey of building a disciplined, awakened, and free life. Discipline is the root of freedom. If you want to live in peace, start by living in order. Jim Rohn